It's showtime, folks.
Absolute cinema. Justin Lynch, Bhawkmemes, back for another video. Today I wanted to talk about the 2026-2027 Western Conference playoff picture. I wanted to look at each team and see whether or not the Blackhawks have a realistic chance of finishing ahead of them next year. Look at what teams in the West got better and got worse. Because look, on this channel, I talk mostly about the Chicago Blackhawks. Obviously, it's mainly a Blackhawks channel. I talk about the NHL, a little bit as well, but mostly the Blackhawks. But look, the Blackhawks' chance of success next year is not going to come entirely through the team itself. There's going to be a lot of factors outside their control, right? More specifically, how the other teams in the West perform, right? What the playoff picture looks like, how much spots are going to be up for grab in the Central, right? So that's what I wanted to take a look at today. I want to take a look at each of the Western Conference teams and see which teams the Blackhawks, have a chance potentially of jumping ahead of next year in the standings. Because look, Blackhawks finished 15th in the West last year, so if they want to make the playoffs, they have to jump ahead of at least 7 teams, right? In order to make that top 8 there. So yeah, we're gonna see if there's any chance of that happening today. So anyway, pull up the display capture and we'll get going. Starting off with the Anaheim Ducks. So the Ducks offseason hasn't quite gone to plan here. Of course, they had the offer sheet, Philadelphia Flyers gave Leo Carlsson an $18 million offer sheet. The Ducks did match that offer, but look, because of that situation, Leo Carlsson's going to be getting paid $3 million more than Connor Bedard the next 5 years, which should he be making more than Bedard? He shouldn't, but look, Leo Carlsson is a great player. I do think, he's going to be worth it in the long run, but that has put this Ducks team in a bit of a salary cap bind because they also have to extend that man right there, Cutter Gauthier. He needs an extension as well. Seneca's eventually going to need an extension as well. So yeah, they're in a bit of a cap bind, even with the cap going up. That has put this team in a bit of a predicament. So I do think the Ducks, look at their offseason, there have been a few departures. Mason McTavish out, Jacob Trouba out. They have lost a few guys, right? Still think it's a very good team, but I would say, I do look at this as a team that's potentially gotten a little worse this summer. I would say Zellweger's another guy who's left as well on defense. So obviously their forward core is still very strong. You got Leo Carlsson as your 1C. You got the 40-goal scorer of Cutter Gauthier. You got Beckett Seneca, who was a Calder, who was in that Calder race last year, one of the best rookies of that class. Few solid veterans here as well of Chris Kreider, Gramlin, a few solid veterans here as well, Killorn. The bottom 6 is a bit mid, I must say. I mean, Poehling, decent bottom 6 guy, but yeah, I would say this bottom 6 leaves a lot to be desired, but the top 6 is very good. There's also Troy Terry as well. I think he's on the IR right now. That's why he's not showing up, but Troy Terry as well. So, no, a very solid forward core. The defense, though, doesn't necessarily impress me. You got Jackson McComb. He's definitely emerged one of the best top young D-man in the league. Pavel Minchikov, is definitely a defensive with a lot of promise back there. But yeah, like this D-core, doesn't necessarily wow me. Definitely feels like they could use another piece back here for sure. I think the loss of Trouba definitely hurts a bit. But yeah, this D-core doesn't necessarily wow me. In net, Dostal has emerged as a pretty solid goaltender. Husso is back up. So yeah, decent goaltending, not amazing, but decent goaltending there. Dostal has definitely been a bit of an upgrade compared to what Gibson was the last few years, past his prime. And of course, you got Joel Quenneville. For the Ducks, that's what you will say. You got a very talented young core here. You got Joel Quenneville, one of the best coaches in hockey, as we know as Blackhawks fans. So I still think this is going to be a very good team. I do think they should be in the conversation next year. Of course, they made the playoffs this last year, of course, and also took out the Edmonton Oilers as well, which is very impressive. Not many people expected that. So it was a good run for them last year. I could see them maybe taking a bit of a step back, though, because the summer hasn't quite gone to plan for them. So, but yeah, I'm going to pull up the tier list here. I've got a bit of a tier here, 3 tiers of the Western Conference teams. First tier here is out of reach, so I think these teams there's really no chance Hawks can finish ahead of. If you're in the in-play tier, I think it's a team the Hawks have a chance of finishing ahead of. I think it's a team the Hawks should be, in the running with, pretty comparable with. And then the should-be tier are teams the Hawks should finish ahead of. And if they don't finish ahead of them, probably means the season didn't go to plan. So starting off with the Ducks, ignore the Coyotes here. This tier maker I chose had the Coyotes in there, so just ignore them. I had to make a custom logo for Utah. But anyway, starting off with the Ducks. So based off of how last year went, probably should put the Ducks up here. But if I'm going to be honest with you, I don't see the Ducks as a team that, is totally out of reach for the Blackhawks. I think they're in play. I think the Ducks are in play. Obviously, you look at their, rebuild compared to ours. The Ducks are definitely at least a year ahead of us, but they did make that jump last year. I think the Hawks are capable of making that jump that the Ducks made last year, this upcoming year. And if the Ducks are kind of in that similar realm points-wise, if they're in the kind of that 90-point range, if the Blackhawks season goes to plan, they're in that kind of 90-point range. If they're in that wild card hunt, I think they can finish pretty close to the Ducks standings wise. So yeah, I think the Ducks are in play. Absolutely, I think they will. You can make the argument they're out of reach. I don't see it. I don't think the Ducks are as far ahead of us as people think. Obviously right now you give them the edge, but I don't think that edge is as I don't think that gap between the Ducks and Hawks is as big as many people would say. So I think the Ducks are in play. And starting off number two, second up number two is who is number two? Calgary Flames. Yep, Calgary Flames number two here. And yeah, I mean, this Flames team here obviously leaves a lot to be desired. There's not much of note here. Of course, the Flames are entering a rebuild. We know that. Flames are entering a rebuild. And yeah, look at this team. It definitely leaves a lot to be desired. I mean, right now, Morgan Frost is their first line center. So that should tell you how deep this team is. Not very good. I think last year, their top point scorer, I believe, was Coronado, and he led the way at 44 points. That's right. Their top producer last year had 44 points, which is pretty ridiculous. So yeah, this team, they got some decent young players here. Connor Zary, decent talent there. They got some pieces, but nothing really special here. Jonathan Huberdeau, we know, is washed. He has not translated for them there in Calgary. That trade definitely hasn't gone well for them, compared to how Matthew Tkachuk has lit up in Florida. Huberdeau is not, he has not met expectations in Calgary thus far. But yeah, I mean, he got some depth, but just not a lot of star power here, in this forward core. Then you look at their defense, again, not very impressive. They did add Simone Nemeth, so he could be, we'll see. He's going to get increased chance there compared to Jersey, so maybe he takes that next step. You're hoping Zane Parekh takes the next step. If you're a Flames fan, of course, he's a very promising young defenseman there, so he could take that step. But yeah, otherwise, not a lot to, look forward to here. You do have a good, solid goaltender in Dustin Wolf in net. He did have as good a year last year, but he's still a very solid goaltender. So not bad goaltending, but yeah, defense and, forward core, particularly the forward core, leaves a lot to be desired. Yeah, I mean, looking at this team, this is the Flames are absolutely a team the Hawks should beat next year. They should finish ahead of them. If the Blackhawks don't finish ahead of the Flames next year, that's a problem. That's absolutely a problem. Because on paper, because that is kind of what this is looking at, we are kind of sort of rating these teams on how they look on paper. On paper, the Blackhawks are a better team than the Flames. Like, I think even if you're a doomer, I think you should be able to agree with me on that. This Flames team, honestly, might be the worst team in the West next year. It's either them or Vancouver. We'll get to Vancouver later, but you could argue the Flames are probably the worst team in the West, at least on paper. They have been a team that sometimes, gets more wins, more points than they probably should. They do tend to overperform sometimes, but yeah, the Flames should absolutely be a team that's in that kind of Landon Dupont conversation. I do think a defense of the talent Landon Dupont could be a very good, could be exactly what that team needs. But yeah, Flames absolutely in the should be tier for me. And next up is the Colorado Avalanche, the Avs. Yeah, this team is still very good. Yeah, I mean, they won the President's Trophy last year. Disappointingly swept in the Western Conference Finals versus Vegas last year, which is, that was disappointing. The President's Trophy curse lives on. 2013 Blackhawks last President's Trophy team to win the Stanley Cup. But no, this team is still very good. They do lose, Valerian Nichushkin, who was a very good piece there. He goes to Columbus. Otherwise, they haven't lost much, though. Of course, they're going to have a full season as in Kadri this year as well. Of course, they added Kadri at the trade deadline this last year, so having him back for a full year will be big. Landeskog's, it's impressive what he's been able to do coming off of injury, missing the last few years, and he's still been very good for them. Of course, past his prime, but still a very good player. Of course, McKinnon, Natchez, been an elite connection there. McKinnon's been able to develop a very similar chemistry of Natchez as he had with Mikko Rantanen previously. Lekkonen's always been a good piece for them. They added Jaden Schwartz as well, so he kind of is an effective Nichushkin replacement, you could say. Obviously, clear divide here between the top six and bottom six. You must be sad. Like the bottom six, it's decent, but nothing special. They do lose a few pieces there. The bottom six, I think Colton Drury move on, a couple other pieces. But no, the top six is definitely among the best in the league. You got a elite core there. Obviously, that's still together there. And of course, the defense, you got Kale McCarr, who needs a new extension. He's hanging into a contract here. But yeah, Kale McCarr, best defenseman in the league. Devon Toews, perfect compliment to him. And yeah, a couple other good pieces. Brent Burns, back for another year. I guess that guy's just never going to retire, I guess. But yeah, obviously a very good decor here as well. Really no weaknesses of his team. There really aren't. It's got that elite core, decent depth as well. Of course, goaltending, you got Wedgwood and Blackwood. So kind of a 1A, 1B tandem there in net. They performed well last year. So, but yeah, Avalanche, Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think we can all agree this team is out of reach. I think that the Abs probably still the best team in the West. At least standings wise. I know Vegas. They were the Western Conference champs last year, but roster wise, I think roster construction wise, I think Avalanche probably the best positioned team in the West. It's kind of surprising they haven't won multiple cups. That core, of course, they won the cup in 2022. They haven't won since. You do think that should be a team considered to be among the favorites this year in terms of the 2027 Cup. They're going to be they're going to be very motivated after the way last year ended. Of course, I think that should leave a bitter taste in their mouth. And yeah, I think they're probably still the best team in the Central. Maybe they had 121 points last year. A lot of times you see Presidents Trophy teams take a slight step back the next year, so maybe they're not quite as strong this year. Maybe it's closer to like 110-point range, but still a very good team. Pretty similar to last year, I think. Yeah, definitely a team I think that's out of reach. I think it's fair to say in the Central. Yeah. Next up is the Dallas Stars. Yeah, similar points for the Stars. I think similar points can be made for them in terms of them and them in Colorado. Of course, the offseason was a bit tricky. If they do get Jason Robertson, they did extend him for one more year in arbitration, but just the 1 year, of course. They didn't get him they didn't get him extended long term. So yeah, we'll be subjected to another year of Jason Robertson rumors there, of course. But yeah, at least for now, he's still there for now. Of course, they got, Wyatt Johnston, who's emerged one of the top young talents in the league. Mikko Rantanen's been a great ad for them. Of course, they've developed that rivalry with Colorado. Of course, Rantanen's previous team. They tend to play each other in the playoffs. But yeah, a lot of talent here. Rope Hintz. I mean, Matt Duchene's in their third line. That should tell you how good this team is. Ben and Sager are definitely getting up there. Like, they're definitely not the players they used to be, but they're still there for now. Of course, the decor, you got, Heiskanen, one of the best defenders in the league. You got Harley and Lindell. It's a pretty solid top three there. But yeah, this Dallas team is still very loaded depth-wise. On paper, arguably the deepest team in the West, you could say. Definitely up there. Got Otter and net as well. So yeah, really no weaknesses of this team as well. I think we can all agree, once again, this is another team that's out of reach. The Hawks have the unfortunate reality that they play in the Central Division, arguably the best, best league in hockey, best division hockey, I should say. So yeah, Avs and Stars, I think we can all agree are out of reach for this Blackhawks team. I don't see a scenario that exists where the Hawks jump those teams this year, unfortunately. So maybe a few years from now, but they're not there yet. All those teams are still very good. So yeah, Dallas, number 2. I'm also ranking these left to right as well. So the team on the left, I have position to have the team on the right. So we're doing that as well. Anyway, next up is the Edmonton Oilers. As you'll see, doing this in alphabetical order here. Edmonton Oilers next up on the list in the Pacific Division. Disappointing year for the Oilers last year, right? Of course, they made it to back-to-back cups in 2024 and 2025. Last year, they lost in the first round to the Ducks. So, disappointing year. I think all that hockey they played probably, it probably caught up to them. Of course, they had some injuries last year as well. A few of those guys in the playoffs were kind of playing through injuries. But I do think the Oilers will be better this year. With that said, they do have Mike Babcock now as coach, so we'll see how that goes. A bit of an interesting move there by Stan Bowman there, definitely. So yeah, we'll see how that goes with Babcock. But no, I mean, look, you got McDavid, you got Draisaitl. As long as you have those two players, it doesn't matter. Like, those two are going to carry. They're going to get them back in the offs. They're going to keep them in contention. It doesn't really matter who you play, but David and Draisaitl, like, those two are going to elevate their line mates. They're going to get the best out of this team. Arguably the two best players in hockey right there. So as long as you have those guys, you're in good shape. For now, of course, McDavid's got 2 years left on his contract. So pressure's definitely on in Edmonton, right? With McDavid's 2 years left on that contract. Time's kind of running out for them to bring home that cup. And I'm not sure this team is, I don't look at this team necessarily and think, it doesn't scream Stanley Cup to me. But again, McDavid, Draisaitl are going to get you in the conversation. They do have a lot of Blackhawks in this team as well. You got Jason Dickinson, you got Colin Dock. He's not pictured here, but Dock is on his team as well. And of course, you got Connor Murphy in the back end. So a lot of former Blackhawks on his team. They brought back all the Blackhawks they acquired at this past trade deadline. Darnell Nurse is out. He moves on to the San Jose Sharks, so they finally moved that contract. Of course, Nurse's play definitely dropped off in recent years, so they moved Nurse. Bouchard's their top defender back there. I mean, he's a top defender in terms of production, not necessarily in terms of defensive play, but he gets a lot of production in the power play. And yeah, but you got a decent decor. Ekholm's a pretty good balancer for Bouchard. You got Jake the Snake Wallman back there, the gritty man. So yeah, I mean, this team, definitely a playoff team. Are they a cup team? We'll see. And net, they get Freddie Anderson. So Anderson's very good when he's healthy. The problem is he's not often healthy. So if he's injured, then you got to rely on Tristan Jarry, and he hasn't been much better than Stuart Skinner was. So, but yeah, I do think this Oilers team should be better next year. Is the support there for McDavid, Draisaitl? That's kind of the question mark for me. You got Shaq Hyman, you got the Nugent Hopkins. You're hoping some of these young guys take a step, but they'd like to see Savoie, Isaac Howard. They'd like to see those guys take a step, but Coldson. So there is definitely some potential here for some of these young guys to take a step, especially if they're playing with McDry. So we'll see what happens there. But no, I would say Oilers. Yeah, I think out of reach. Like I don't see the Hawks. I think another team we can all agree Hawks. They're not going to finish out of the Oilers next year. Obviously, definitely a team that's in a different wavelength than us. So still looking for that cup of that core. They're still looking for that cup. Dallas, another team, still looking for that cup as well. So yeah, we'll see if those two teams can find a breakthrough next year. Next up is the LA Kings, Los Angeles Kings up next on the board. Of course, they made that coaching change this offseason. Laviolette in, coaching that team. Kings are struggling in the playoffs. They have made the playoffs the last 5 years, but they've been first-round exits every year. They will have a full season of Breadman next year. Panarin will be with the team full-time next year. They get Fiala back from injury. Of course, he was injured at the Olympics last year. Definitely missed him. But yeah, they lose Kopitar. They lose their captain, Anze Kopitar. So there's definitely a leadership void there that needs to be filled. Like, it's going to be tough to replace Kopitar. They're definitely hoping that Quinn Byfield could finally emerge as that first-line center. They was kind of, drafted to be. Hasn't reached it yet. Like, he's been good, but he hasn't been great yet. You got Kempe there. Panarin Kempe should be able to develop a pretty nice chemistry there. They do bring in Matt Zuccarello from Minnesota, but he's getting up there. Eric Hall is your 2C, sure. Decent third line here as well. So, I mean, it's all right. I mean, they brought back Corey Perry. Decent forward core, not amazing, but decent. In terms of defense, Drew Doughty's getting up there in age. Right now, he's their number one defenseman. They're hoping Brandt Clark can kind of develop into that, but he's not there yet. But yeah, this D-core kind of leaves a lot to be desired. I mean, you got Cody Ceci back there. Not really a super impressive D-core. And net, Kemper and Forsberg, they two good goaltenders, not great. So, but yeah, this Kings team, they don't really impress me that much. They don't faze me. I don't look at this Kings team and think, oh, this team is far and away better than we are. Kind of similar to the Ducks. I mean, I think the Ducks are better than the Kings, but yeah, I think that's another California team that's I would put in a similar wavelength. I think they're in play. I think the Kings are in play next year. I could see them being a team that drops out of the playoffs next year, especially with the emergence of, the Ducks and the Sharks, their California foes, and hopefully the Hawks as well. I can't see the Kings potentially getting bumped out there. They do play in the Pacific, though. Of course, we know the Pacific Division, in the words of Comic David, is a pillow fight compared to the Central Division, much weaker division. So that could help them out. I mean, last year the Kings made the playoffs despite, 90 points in the standings and like how many overtime losses they had. I think they had nearly 20 overtime shootout losses last year. So they were definitely, 1-point merchants last year, extra point merchants. So, but yeah, I do think this Kings team, even with the addition of Panarin, I mean, Panarin's still great, but again, getting up there. So I don't think that's going to save this team. I think the Kings, I could see them being a team that drops out next year for sure. I do think they're a team that could be in play for the Blackhawks to potentially fish ahead of, especially if they're finishing, fifth in Pacific and the Hawks are finishing potentially fifth in the Central. Hawks should have a better record because the Central, obviously tougher competition. So yeah, I think the Kings are in play for the Hawks to finish ahead of potentially. Next up is the Minnesota Wild. Yeah, I think similar to Colorado and Dallas, same arguments for Minnesota. I think that's still your top three. Last year you had your clear top three of Colorado, Dallas, and Minnesota. I don't think that's going to change this year. Obviously, you got Krill, the thrill, Kaprizov. You got Matt Boldy. I think has emerged one of the top forwards in the league. Got a loaded forward core here. I will say though, their center depth is a bit questionable. You got Joel Eriksson Ek. You got Ryan Hartman. But yeah, I mean, right now Yurov is their 1C. I know he's a promising prospect, but Kaprizov can maybe bring him up, but I do think they could use another center here. I know they've been in on Dylan Larkin. I know Larkin's definitely a guy Minnesota's been wanting to acquire. It hasn't happened yet. Larkin, good chance at this point. If Yzerman out, he could just stick up Detroit at this point. But so yeah, I know they've been in on Dylan Larkin. It hasn't happened yet. But so yeah, there's a couple pieces here, a couple Russians that could play with Kaprizov. We'll see Kaprizov could kind of level up his line mates here. They add in Blake Coleman, solid depth there. They lose Zuccarello, of course, to LA. But yeah, no, still a very solid team. Of course, you got the Foligno brothers. Nick Foligno decided to re-up for another year. So the Nick Foligno, former Blackhawks captain, back for another year with his brother Marcus. Fun to see those two kind of play together. I like this fourth line actually. Definitely a sort of Bash Brothers type line going on here. A lot of physicality in this fourth line, but of course Blackhawks, a couple Blackhawks legends on this team. You got Ryan Hartman, you got Nick Foligno, a few Blackhawks legends on this team. But so yeah, I mean, Wild is still very strong. Of course, the high point of this team is of course this defense. You got that Quinn Hughes, Brock Faber deep pair. Arguably the best deep pair in the league right here. The league right here, at least the top deep pair, I would say. Quinn Hughes, like Cale Makar, he needs a contract extension. He's heading into a contract year, so Quinn Hughes needs a contract extension. That's kind of the question mark, is how long that contract ends up being. Of course, the rumor has always been that Quinn Hughes and Jack Hughes eventually want to play together. So we'll see if Quinn Hughes, if that's a short-term deal, might not be great for Minnesota if that's a short-term deal and he lines himself up with Jack Hughes. So we'll see what happens there if Quinn Hughes does, commit to Minnesota, or if he potentially leaves the door open for, to play with his brother Jack or and Luke in Jersey or elsewhere. But no, very good deep here, and behind Hughes and Faber, you got Brodeen, Spurgeon as well. Zach Bogosian somehow still playing. Feels like he's been around forever. And then of course in net, Jesper Wallstedt's definitely emerged. They still got Gus as well, but Wallstedt's definitely among the more promising young goaltenders in the league. So we'll see how he performs. Should get an increased workload this year. But yeah, I think Minnesota. Yeah, I think they're still out of reach, unfortunately. In fact, I'm going to put them ahead of Dallas. I think, yeah, Colorado, Minnesota, Dallas, unfortunately, I think they still run the Central. They ran it last year. They've ran it the past few years. I don't think it's really going to change this year. I still think that's their top three. Of course, Minnesota's still looking for their first cup. They did finally win a playoff series last year. First time they won a playoff series in over a decade, so they finally accomplished that. But yeah, I still think that's their top three in the Central right there. I think they're all out of reach for the Blackhawks. Next up is the Nashville Predators. The Nashville Predators, pulling them up here. Here they are. So yeah, Predators, kind of a disappointing year last year. They do drop out of the playoffs. They were in the mix though. They were in the mix, competitive 500 hockey team. Solid team, not nothing special, I would say, but a solid team. A bit of an aging core here. I mean, Stamkos isn't getting any younger. He did have a 40-plus goal year last year. O'Reilly's not getting any younger, though he's still performing well. Marchessault is starting to decline. He's not getting any younger. Forsberg, one of the more underrated players in the league, is always around a point per game. Doesn't seem to be a guy that always gets the recognition that he deserves. But I will say they haven't made a few nice additions here. I do like the Maverick Bourque addition from Dallas. I think that's a very solid addition for this team. Definitely hoping a few of these young guys take a step, like Luke Evangelista, for instance. A few young guys could take a step here. A few depth adds as well. They added Drury. They added Colm from Colorado, of course. Colorado's former GM took over, so he made a few moves of his former team. But so yeah, got some decent depth here in his forward core. So yeah, well, I mean, it's a good team here in Nashville. Of course, you got the defense. You got Roman Josi back there, one of the best defensemen in the league. But after Josi, I will say, after Josi, this decor does not wow me whatsoever after Josi. It's kind of Roman Josi and friends back here on this decor. It doesn't really wow me, this decor, outside of Roman Josi. You do have UC Saros and net, of course, no goals, UC Saros. So as long as you got as long as you got Josi and Saros in your back end, you're in pretty good shape. It's just the question mark will be the offense. You got some decent depth here, but will there be enough goals here? We'll see. I think Nashville, solid team, but I don't look at this Nashville team, though, and think, oh, there's no chance Hawks can finish out this Nashville team. I do think they're in play. I think Nashville's in play. I'll put them just behind LA there. I think they're probably on a similar wavelength. But yeah, I'll put them right behind LA. I think they're in play. I do think Nashville is going to be a team around where the Blackhawks are. They're going to be kind of fighting for that second wildcard spot. If that second wildcard spot, that fifth spot in the Central, is up for grabs, I think Nashville is going to be a team the Hawks are kind of fighting with there in that race. Of course, Nashville was a team that wasn't too far ahead of the Blackhawks last year, at least for the first half of the year. Of course, second half of the year, Blackhawks kind of dropped off a bit, fell away from a lot of those teams. But, easy to forget first half of last year, the Blackhawks were in the mix of a lot of these teams in the Central. But of course, Bedard and Azar get injured, and then they kind of drop off. But I do think this year, Nashville is definitely a team the Hawks could fight with. I think they're in play for this Blackhawks team. Next up is the Seattle Kraken. This team is just so unbelievably mid, man. Like, this team is just probably the most mid team there is. Like, just doesn't wow me whatsoever, this Seattle Kraken team. There's no stars here. There's no stars here on the Seattle team. I mean, you got Matty Beniers, 2023 Calder winner. He hasn't really had a season like that since, but he's a solid two-way player there, but not really 1C yet. Jordan Eberle is your captain, but Jordan Eberle in the first line, the big 26. Jared McCann's the closest thing they have to a star. He's hit the 40 goal mark before, but otherwise, more of a 30 goal, 50, 60 point guy. Berkeley Cann's a young player that hoping takes a step. Shane Wright, he's been in trade rumors. They haven't moved him yet, but he's a guy that'd be nice if he could take a step. They added Samoskevich from Florida, solid middle six forward there. Kakko's been a bit better. He's been a bit better in Seattle compared to New York, but hasn't quite taken that step yet. I don't think he's ever going to be that player that's expected when he was drafted number 2 overall in 2019. I mean, there's depth here, but there's just no sexy players here. It's just mid. It's just so much mid. And then, of course, on the deep pair, you got Vince Dunn. Like, he's your top defenseman back there. Brandon Montour has been decent for them. Of course, the former Florida Panther. Decent decor. I mean, you got some good players here. You got some good pieces. Maybe Riker Evans could take a step. He played with Bedard and Juniors with Regina. But there's just nothing here that wows you. Decord and Grubauer and Ned, decent rotation, nothing special. But yeah, just no. Like this is a team I think the Hawks should be able to beat. I think they're better than Seattle, but the Kraken are a team. If the Hawks aren't finishing out the Kraken, they got some issues. Because on paper, this Blackhawks team has so much more potential compared to Seattle. Seattle's got some decent veterans, but there's just not a lot of potential on this team. It's just so much mid, just an average squad, and just kind of just boring. Like every time I watch a Kraken game, they put me to sleep, man. So no offense to my cousins over there, but my God, your team is so boring to watch. So yeah, Kraken, I think our team, the Hawks, should be able to beat next year. Yeah. And next up, yeah, this will cause some stirs. The San Jose Sharks, also known as the Tel Aviv Sharks, I like to call them. The San Jose Sharks, of course, the team that if you listen to, most of the people in the NHL media hockey circles, they'll tell you the San Jose Sharks rebuild is miles ahead of the Blackhawks. And I'm just not quite sure about that. Now, to San Jose's credit, their forward core is pretty nasty. Like, I'm not going to lie. I can't cope, but this forward core is pretty scary. Of course, you got Macklin Celebrini, you got Will Smith. Of course, and we know what that duo is like. Celebrini, of course, emerged one of the best players in the league. At this point, is ahead of Bedsy. We're hoping Bedsy can kind of take that next step and kind of get closer to him, potentially ahead of him at some point. But yeah, I mean, right now, Celebrini, has had the better start, and the Sharks have had the better, they've had the better go of it of late. But yeah, I mean, yeah, Celebrini, Smith, of course, in the first line. They're hoping Chernishaw could take a step next year. Definitely young forward, hoping could take a step. They definitely want to see Michael Misa take a step. He didn't have a very impressive rookie year. Hoping he could take a step. He didn't play the full year last year. This year he'll play the full year. They added Mason Marchment in the offseason, add some grit to that top six. Colin Graff, solid middle six guy. Of course, Ivar Stenberg, the guy we were hoping we could get in the draft. Right now they got him in the third line. I would think he probably plays a Misa on the second line. I think that would make sense. So for now, he's on the third line according to Daily Faceoff. I do think Stenberg should be in that Rookie of the Year mix with Frundell and Kansov, of course. But yeah, this forward core, I mean, they got Toffoli in the fourth line right now, so that should tell you how good this forward core is. The D core, though, I don't think it's gotten that much better. Like, you do add Jacob Trouba, you do add Darnell Nurse, but I don't think it makes this D-core that much better, to be honest with you. Like, I'd rather have Bowen Byram than Trouba and Darnell Nurse. Some people might disagree with that. I think Byram's got so much more potential in his game to become a number one defenseman. Trouba and Nurse are solid veterans, but that's it. They're veterans. They're short-term solutions, right? They do have some guys, on the wings, the prospect system, but yeah, a lot of money invested in Trouba and Nurse. Nurse, in my opinion, one of the more, overpaid, overrated defensemen in the league. We'll see it, change of scenery in San Jose. Maybe it'll suit him well. Trouba, good physical defenseman, but again, I don't think he solves his team's defensive problems. They're hoping Sam Dickinson could take a step, right? They need him to take a step. They had Kesselring as well, sure. It's better than it was. The D-core was brutal the last couple of years. It's better, but I don't think it's that much better. And then in net, you got Yaroslav Askarov. Of course, Skarov's numbers haven't been very good. I mean, a lot of people were saying that Skarov would be better than Spencer Knight. It hasn't been even close so far. Knight has definitely been the better goalie so far. Askarov, if the team in front of him is better, if the defense in front of him is better, that should help his numbers. But so far, hasn't been very impressive. Of course, he could still turn around. Still a very promising goaltender there. But thus far, hasn't been very impressive. So, but yeah, I look at the Sharks team. Look, I know a lot of people in the media are going to tell you the Sharks are so far ahead of his Blackhawks team. That they're out of reach. I don't think they're out of reach. I think the Sharks are in play. I am going to put them ahead of the Ducks. I do think I can see the Sharks and Ducks swapping places this year. I think the Sharks got better this summer, while I think the Ducks got worse. So I'm going to put the Sharks to the top of in play. I don't think the Sharks are out of reach. I do think they're going to take another step this year. I do think they should be a playoff team this year. I do think the Sharks should be a playoff team. They should be kind of fighting for that, that kind of, fourth spot there. Potentially third spot in the Pacific, honestly, because it's going to be Vegas, Edmonton. I think the Sharks can finish third in the Pacific. I think it's going to be one of those California teams. Like, these three California teams are going to fight for that last spot. Right now, I do think the Sharks are the best of them. While the Ducks and Kings made the playoffs last year, I do think both of these two teams got worse. While I think the Sharks got better, I think a lot of these young players could take a step as well. So they need more. They need more support from players not named Celebrini. Celebrini definitely has kind of carried this team last year. They need some of these other young guys to take a step as well. It can't just be Celebrini. So, but yeah, I do think the Sharks should be better next year. But I do think they're in play. I don't think the Sharks are as far ahead of the Hawks as people will have you think. Next up is the St. Louis Blues. Blues clues. St. Louis Blues. I think similar points as the Nashville Predators for me. I think the Blues are a solid team. They got a lot of depth here. But again, don't look at this Blues team and think that they're miles ahead of the Blackhawks. Of course, you got Robert Thomas, your 1C. He was in trade rumors, but looks like they're going to keep him. So, that shouldn't be that distraction this year. Dylan Holloway's been a great ad for that team from Edmonton. Definitely losing Holloway and Broberg to the offer sheets there. Definitely a miss for Stan Bowman. I think that Edmonton team could probably use Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg right about now. But of course, Snuggerud, very promising young player for them. They add in McMichael and McTavish. I like the Mason McTavish ad from Anaheim. I do like the McTavish ad. Definitely screams St. Louis Blue right there. He and Bedsy have had a bit of beef, so that should be a pretty good rivalry there. Of course, they have McMichael from Washington. They lose Jordan Kyrou. Jordan Kyrou goes to Washington. But yeah, you got some good pieces here. Blackhawks legend Pius Suter here. Got a few pieces, pretty solid forward core. I like this top 9 here. I definitely like this top 9. Not a lot of star power. I mean, you got Robert Thomas. You got a few good players behind him, and not a lot of star power per se, kind of like Nashville. You got a lot of good players, but not a lot of great players. But you have depth. And they have a great coach. With Jim Montgomery as your coach, he's going to get more wins out of a team they probably should otherwise get. So when you have a good coaching staff and a good system, it's going to get more wins out of your team they probably deserve. So at least player-wise. So defense, Broberg has emerged as a pretty good defenseman for them. Otherwise, though, at this D-core, I mean, Parayko and Fowler aren't getting any younger. Carlo, decent third pair ad. But this D-core doesn't wow me. Honestly, it doesn't wow me. In net, you got Hofer. Binnington's absolutely fallen off. He's kind of washed at this point, but Hofer has definitely emerged as a solid goaltender for them. But yeah, I think this Blues team's in play. I think they're in play. I'm going to put them by Nashville. I'd probably say, are they ahead of Nashville? I'm going to put Nashville ahead of the Blues for now. I think Blues and Nashville are pretty interchangeable. I think they're pretty similar. But I think the Blues are absolutely in play for this Blackhawks team. Last year, for a good portion of the year, the Blackhawks are actually ahead of these two teams. Of course, second half of the year, of course, the season changed. Blackhawks first half of the year is much different than the second half of the year. Of course, we know that. So, but yeah, I think both of these central teams of Nashville and St. Louis are in play. As long as they're a team not named Colorado, Minnesota, and Dallas, I think pretty much any team in the Central is in play for this Blackhawks team, honestly. You could call me delusional. You could call me a homer, but that's just the way I see it. Next up is the Utah Mammoth, not the Arizona Coyotes. The Utah Mammoth is next up. Yeah, I think Utah, obviously, they took a step last year. They made the playoffs last year. They're fourth best team in the Central. Lost to Vegas in round 1, but definitely took a step last year. And I think they got I do think they got better this summer as well. You add in Vincent Trocheck. I think it's a solid add for this team. They do lose JJ Peterka, but he didn't really wow with the club last year anyway. Of course, they got Blackhawks legend Nick Schmaltz. You got Clayton Keller. That's baseball. You got Logan Cooley. You got Dylan Gunther, 40-goal scorer. A lot of good, talented players on this team. D-core as well. You got Mikhail Shergachev wearing number 98. Bro thinks he's Bedsy. But yeah, good D-core here. You got very, very solid D-core. Just a solid team. Good depth here. A lot of good, talented, young players. You could definitely take another step. They added Anders Lee as well from the Islanders. So solid veteran ad for this team. Yeah, and I would say the goaltending is a bit sus. I mean, Vince Melka has been all right for them. They do add Kosa. Kosa's, definitely will be a guy that'll get a chance this year. Promising young goaltender. We'll see how he plays in the NHL. He didn't really get the chance in Detroit, so we'll see how he does in Utah. But yeah, I do look at this Utah team, very talented team. The Blackhawks did sweep them last year. They played them 4 times last year, beat them every time. So Hawks have kind of owned this team. So I think a lot of people probably put Utah out of reach. But I think they're in play. Honestly, I think Utah's in play. I think most likely, realistically, I think Utah is probably the 4th best team in the Central. I think they probably finish ahead of the Blackhawks. I think Utah probably finishes 4th, while Hawks fight for the 5th spot with, Nashville, St. Louis, and Winnipeg. But I do think this Utah team's in play. I don't think they're as far ahead of the Blackhawks as people think. I don't put them in that totally out of reach tier. I do think they're in play. If you want to argue they should be up here, go ahead. But I think they're in play for this Blackhawks team. I really do. Definitely another young team that could take another step. But we'll see. A lot of young teams, it's not always a linear path. Sometimes a young team might kind of flatline or take a step back the next season. So we'll see what Utah does. And I've been impressed with them. I think, definitely been a much better run organization compared to Arizona. Hockey's definitely been thriving there. I think, the grayer success in the ice definitely been helping them. But been very impressive ownership there. I think, definitely an organization that's come in and definitely has fit in well, I think, in the Central. So yeah, but I do think Utah's in play for the Blackhawks. Next up is the Vancouver Canucks. This team is ass. This team is absolute ass. Hawks should absolutely finish out of this team. I think, the Canucks were the worst team in the league last year, worst team in the West, worst team in the NHL. They're kind of screwed over in the lottery. We'll see next year. I think this team probably finishes last again. Either them or Calgary. Right? They're going to be, firmly in the race for Landon DuPont there. But yeah, this team, I mean, if Elias Pettersson was your first line center 3 years ago, that'd be good. Not so much now. He's definitely fallen off. He's still there for now. There have been a lot of trade rumors around Pettersson, but he's still there for now. You got some decent young players here, but otherwise, this forward core is just ass. Besser's another guy like Pettersson. He's kind of fallen off a bit. DeBrusk, another guy's kind of been in trade rumors. But yeah, this forward core leaves a lot to be desired. They do bring in Brendan Gallagher. He could be a decent, veteran guy for this team. The decor, of course, without Quinn Hughes is definitely rough. Z Bouillum, definitely, defender that has a lot of promise there. Could be a mini Quinn Hughes down the line. But yeah, this decor is rough. I mean, Hronik's one of your best players. That's just how ass your team is. They bring in Jamie Alexi out there. He could be a decent stabilizer back there. And now you got Demko. Demko is a good goaltender when he's healthy. Problem is, he's rarely healthy. So, and then you got Blackhawks legend Kevin Lankinen, who's kind of struggled the last couple of years. So, yeah, this team is nothing really, to wow you on this team. I think they're probably the worst team in the West. Yeah, Hawks should beat them. I think Hawks should absolutely beat this Vancouver team. If they don't, and then the Hawks are in the base in the league next year, then the rebuild isn't going to plan. I think we could all agree on that. So, but yeah, Blackhawks should absolutely finish out this Vancouver team. I don't think I have to expand on that statement too much. Yeah. Next up is the Vegas Golden Knights. Of course, Vegas Golden Knights 2026 Stanley Cup finalists there. They lost to the Hurricanes in the Stanley Cup finals. And yeah, the team's still very much, very good. They do lose Dorfea. They do lose Paulo Dorfea to the New York Rangers. Otherwise, team looks pretty similar. You got, of course, Mitch Marner's been a great ad for them. Of course, we got a lot of stars in this team, between Eichel, between Stone, between Mitch Marner, a lot of star power in this team. You got Hurdle in your third line. And a lot of depth in this team as well, right? A lot of depth. Brett Howland was great for the playoffs. Barbashev has definitely emerged. Carlson's been there since 2017. He's always been, solid for them. So, yeah, a lot of good pieces on this team. The decor very solid as well. They did lose Pietrangelo last year, but a lot of these guys stepped up. They do add Rasmus Anderson, of course, full time. They were able to extend him this summer as well, long term. Shea Theodore's been one of the more underrated players in the league, I would say, in terms of defense. Hannafin's definitely emerged as well. A lot of just solid defensemen back here. Like, no stars per se, but just a very solid decor, right? A lot of solid players. And then, in net, you got Carter Hart in net, and then Aiden Hill. So the goaltending is definitely one thing you look at is a bit sus. Hill struggled last year. Hart was iffy. So yeah, I mean, this Vegas team, yeah, they're out of reach. I think between them and Edmonton, I think we can agree those two teams are kind of out of reach for this Blackhawks team. They're really the only two teams specific they could kind of staple in the playoffs. That the rest specific is definitely up for grabs, but I think those two teams are definitely the top guns. Vegas, I think, Oilers should have better regular seasons this year as well. They did have great regular seasons last year. I think they should both be better, should be able to feast on, kind of those lesser teams in their division. So, but yeah, Vegas, Edmonton, definitely, two teams I think, we know the top three essential between Colorado, Minnesota, Dallas, they're in their own tier. I think Vegas, Edmonton were the only two teams specific, I would say, are kind of in their own tier as well. So I would say that's kind of your top five teams, I'd say, but I don't really see a world that exists with the Blackhawks. Fish had them. So anyway, last up is the Winnipeg Jets. Winnipeg Jets last up, Central Division foes there. This Jets team doesn't faze me. You got a great first line. You got Connor Scheifele-Velarde, very good first line. What is the rest of this lineup? What is the rest of this lineup? Like, seriously, like, after this first line, you got nothing. You're hoping Cole Perfetti takes a step, right? He could take a step, absolutely. But yeah, like, there's nothing here. There's nothing here. Of course, Jonathan Toews retires, right? But yeah, there's nothing here. I mean, you got Josh Morrissey in the back end, very good defenseman there. You add Mario Ferraro from San Jose, this decor doesn't really wow me. You do have Connor Hellebuyck in net, of course, one of the best goaltenders in the league, but Connor Hellebuck's been featuring a lot of trade rumors. We'll see if he sticks around. I mean, as long as you have Hellebuyck, you have Morrissey, and you have your core players at Connor Scheifele-Velarde, like, you do have pillars in each position. So I think, if you want to say that for Winnipeg, they do have pillars in each position. But man, you better hope Hellebuyck doesn't leave, because if Hellebuyck leaves, you got Stuart Skinner as your number two. So, which is obviously a problem, I think. So yeah, this Jets team, I think the Hawks should be able to beat. I think they absolutely should finish. Had them. I'm not going to quite put them down here. I'll put them up here. I think, I'll put them just below Nashville and St. Louis, because it's hard to believe, like, they did win the President's Trophy in 2025. So maybe they bounce back, right? Maybe they have a bounce back, but I mean, without Ehlers, definitely the team hasn't been the same. And just, I don't know. Like, I'm just not wowed. Like, you do have a solid core, but like, after that core, like, there's just not a lot of depth in this team. Just not a team that just really wows me, at least on paper. So maybe they have a bounce back. We'll see, right? Maybe they have a bounce back. But I think right now, I would say they're probably the weakest team in the Central. I know a lot of people would say the Hawks, but I think it's probably the Jets at this point. And anyway, that leaves the Blackhawks. I'm not going to talk too much about the Blackhawks, because all I do in this channel is talk about the Blackhawks, right? Of course, Bedard's not pictured here because he's on the IR, but we know Bedard eventually figures in here. If you're watching this channel, you're a Blackhawks fan, you've heard me talk ad nauseum about the Blackhawks, so I'm not going to talk. Just check out any of my videos and you'll know my opinion on this Blackhawks team, right? But if I had to place the Blackhawks somewhere in this tier, I would probably place them, I would say, in between the Sharks and the Ducks. I think right here, which would place them, let's see, that would make them the 8th best team in the West. So that would make them fifth in the Central, right? Because Colorado, then Minnesota, Dallas, Utah, Blackhawks 5, and then after the Pacific teams of Vegas, Edmonton, and San Jose. I put them, slightly below San Jose. Like I want to put them ahead of the Sharks, but like if I'm to be honest right now, like, I'd probably put the Sharks slightly ahead of us. I know this might be bold. I do think we jump ahead of the Ducks, and that might be a bold prediction. If you want to argue the Ducks ahead of us, go ahead. You can make that argument. But I could see the Ducks kind of dropping off a bit this year. I do think the Hawks are going to take that jump. I think they're going to be a 40-win, 90-point team, which should place them around these teams of San Jose and Anaheim. And I think there's going to be 5 spots in the Central. I think 3 spots in Pacific. Because that's the way I see it. I think the Central's a much better division. So I think for the Blackhawks, there'll be an extra spot up for grabs in the Central. I think they'll benefit them. And I think they finished just ahead of these teams, right? I think, all of Nashville, St. Louis, Winnipeg are in play. I don't think any of these teams are going to be, super bad. I think they'll all be pretty competitive because I think the Central's a much more competitive division. But I do think, at this rate, I do think the Hawks can jump ahead of these 3 teams. Of course, the Hawks have finished 8th the past 4 years, but I mean, they have to jump out last eventually, right? I think this has to be the year. So I say they move ahead of these teams. I think just ahead these California teams of Anaheim and LA. And then I think these 3 teams down here are going to be, the lottery teams of Seattle, Calgary, and Vancouver. So anyway, I'll do another video in the future breaking down the playoff picture further. Like, I'll do a playoff predictions video. Of course, that'll feature the entire league, right? The Eastern Conference as well as the West. So we'll do a playoff predictions video at some point before the season, maybe close to when the season starts, kind of breaking down what I think is going to happen in all 4 divisions and give an official, playoff prediction for this team. But yeah, according to this though, based off of this prediction, I do think the Hawks can break into that kind of that last wild card spot in the playoffs this year. So call me delusional, call me a homer, call me whatever you want to call me. Hey, there's a lot of doomers, there's a lot of negativity out there. I want to be optimistic. I want to have an optimistic worldview. I think the Blackhawks, after all the moves that have been made this summer, have the capability of taking that step next year. So we'll see if they can do that, right? But anyway, that's all I got for this one. Thank you all so much for watching this video. This is Justin Lynch, Bhawkmemes out. If you like this video, feel free to like it, subscribe to the channel for more content. Feel free to hype the video on YouTube. And yeah, if you like this content, feel free to share it around friends, family that like the Blackhawks, like hockey. And yeah, anyway, but comment, and also, feel free to comment your opinions down below. If you think I'm cooking, if you think I'm delusional, feel free to let me know in the comments. Anyway, so I got for this one. Justin Lynch, Bhawkmemes out, and I'll see you on the next one, baby. Bye-bye. Absolute cinema. Boop.